Hi everyone, welcome and lovely to see such a mix of people joining us today, from current customers to newbies. My name's Gillian, I'm the Head of Marketing at WhisperClaims and your host today. We've got some really great topics to discuss with you on this webinar around building an in-house R&D service. These have been largely inspired by questions from accountants and consultants who are currently using WhisperClaims software and who are also in the process of building their R&D consultancy business. So I do hope that you'll find that you're going to relate to these today. On the webinar, I'm also joined by Mike Dean, who is our Commercial Director and Founder, and Richard Edwards, our CEO and founder of WhisperClaims. They'll be sharing some quick insights with you today on how the R&D market has changed, what counts as R&D, how to prepare a robust claim, and some of the common mistakes and pitfalls that we see. So we'll have plenty of things and plenty of food for thought for you today. Richard and Mike, could you say hi to everybody?
Hi everyone.
Hi, good to see
you. So just to let you know, this webinar is also a chance to get your questions answered. To do that, if you could submit a question to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, so you should see that in the Zoom menu. If there are any questions that you see from other attendees that pop up and you think they're quite good, give them a thumbs up in the Q&A box. And any today that we don't manage to cover, we'll write up in a Q&A blog and we'll send it over to you. So hopefully we'll get through all the questions that do get asked. And then after the webinar, I'm going to send you a video recording and the results of some of the questions. So if you miss anything, you can obviously sort of watch that back again. So please just sit back and relax and enjoy the webinar. So I think that's us ready to get started. So we'll just move on to sort of the first subject of the day. So Richard, just looking at kind of your experience over the years, what sort of changes have you observed in the R&D consultancy market?
Yeah, so my experience in this market started in 2008 when I started a consultancy specializing in R&D tax relief consultancy with two other guys. And back at that time, it was quite a sleepy marketplace. So there weren't a lot of people kind of pushing the service as consultants. And the accountants that were active, I think, were primarily kind of doing claims in quite a responsive, reactive basis. So basically their clients would approach them to do the claim, they would do them, but they weren't kind of taking out the service more broadly to the portfolio or seeking to push it. 2012, so 4 years after we started, that was probably the golden age for us as consultants, because at that time finding clients was really easy. It was like shooting fish in a barrel. We were getting loads and loads of referrals from accountants, but we were starting to see other people entering the market as well. So there was just that kind of glimmerings, the embers of competition starting to fire up. 4 years after that, 2016, everything had changed again. By that point, it was a really competitive marketplace amongst the consultants. And that was really leading to some interesting trends around pricing. So we were seeing contingent fee rates falling just because people were undercutting each other. And I think that's when the accountants were starting to take things in-house as well. So we'd noticed that leads were starting to dry up at that point. Fast forward again to today, 2020, it's, I suppose, the same things, but even more so. So you've got the big R&D specialists out there throwing a lot of money at their sales and marketing teams. They've got some quite kind of aggressive tactics for winning business, and they're spending a lot of money on PPC, things like that. But kind of balancing that is we're starting to see the emergence of tech and automation and digitization in R&D, just as we've seen in kind of other aspects of accountancy as well. So that's beginning to take roots, and it's really interesting to think how that's going to kind of affect things in the future.
Great. And Mike, how do you think technology is affecting the accounting and consultancy markets?
Well, if you sort of take it more generally in the accounting world, I guess you've seen technology get adopted in areas like practice management for many years. So companies like CCH and Iris, who've been around for a long time. But actually, interestingly, I think those sorts of technologies cascaded down from maybe some of the bigger players in the market. So more recently, you're seeing accounting software like Xero, free agent, maybe QuickBooks, that have perhaps really emerged perhaps more so from the bottom end of the market, with lots of smaller players adopting those technologies. And then more recently, you've got these kind of niche applications like ourselves and like people like GoProposal, where we're addressing a sort of small area, if you like, of functionality within those firms. And I think, you know, those technologies are getting adopted almost from the bottom up. So it's small firms are using technology like ours to really start to differentiate themselves out there in the market. Great.
And so moving on to the next topic. So what counts as R&D? This is often a common topic amongst some of the newbies to R&D tax consultancy. Richard, can you explain what's the HMRC definition of R&D?
So that's quite a big question. We could probably spend a whole webinar just talking about that. But if you move forward to the next slide, I've got a handy image that kind of acts as a bit of a synopsis of how HMRC define R&D. So when we're talking or trying to explain the standard that HMRC use, there's kind of 5 key criteria that we talk about. So the first of these is very basically that the work that the company's doing has got to take place within the field of science and technology. So this is not about things like estate agency or economics or social science. It's got to be within a field that's recognized to be kind of hard science. So typically that would be engineering, software development, electronics, pharmaceutical. It's got to be that kind of thing. So nothing woolly or, as I say, social science based. The next thing that is really important is that the company is seeking to make within that field what HMRC refer to as an advance in science or technology. So that doesn't need to be particularly big or earth-shattering. It can be small and it can be very niche, but it does have to be measurable and objective as opposed to a subjective improvement. So typically that's usually making things lighter, faster, stronger, more fuel efficient, more tolerant to error. The important point being that it is a measurable and objective improvement. And also, it's not just for that particular company. So HMRC is looking at what is common in industry. So what's the industry baseline? What kind of tools, techniques, and knowledge is already out there? And they're trying to understand the difference between that industry baseline and what the company is seeking to achieve in that particular project. So it's always, the advance is always kind of relative to what your competitors are doing or what's common in your field, not just kind of your level of knowledge itself. The next thing that's really important, point number 4, is if you're able as a company to kind of make an advance without any technical issues, that's fantastic for you as a company, great job, but they're not going to give you tax relief for that. So they're saying their full jargon is you've got to be seeking to make an advance in science and technology through the resolution of technological uncertainty, which is just jargon. And the uncertainty relates to the technical issues, problems, challenges, and issues that the company has to overcome in order to make that scientific advance. So in the diagram, that little green bar is a nice kind of illustration showing that that's what you're getting the R&D tax relief for, is it's trying to make an advance in your field relative to the industry baseline and overcoming technical challenges to do so. And then the last part of that jigsaw is HMRC looking for what they refer to as competent professionals leading the work, directing subcontractors, and really hands-on involved in the technical work and resolving those challenges. And the reason for that is they just want to make sure that if a company is telling them that, well, something is difficult, this is a difficult problem for us to resolve, they would just want to double check, well, is it actually a genuinely difficult technical problem, or is it simply that you don't have people with the right skills and experience appropriate for that particular challenge? So that's the kind of 5 kind of key things. The full guidance can be found online. It's about 8 pages long. It's actually, as government guidance goes, it's a good read. But this is just what we think is the kind of 5 key things pulled out of that.
So Rich, just to put a bit of colour on that, have we got any recent examples that maybe bring what you've just said to life?
Yeah, so there's a couple that I can talk about just from previous experience of being involved in inquiries. So those inquiries were brought to us by one of our customers. They'd worked with a consultant, the claims had gone in, they'd kind of run around with HMRC, and then we were kind of brought in to help resolve those. So the first one was interesting. It was an ice cream manufacturer, kind of low volume, high quality ice cream manufacturer. And their project, this work was going back a few years, was the development of a range of vegan ice creams. So at the time that the work started, the common way of doing that, the industry baseline, if you like, was to use coconut oils. And the two flavors that were predominantly produced were coconut and chocolate, so quite kind of strong flavors. But the issue with that is that the coconut oils imparted a really kind of strong, not unpleasant, but a strong distinctive flavor that kind of got in the way of the company developing a range of more subtle flavors. So their challenge became, okay, well, how do we create vegan products, vegan ice creams that have the same taste, consistency, mouthfeel as our dairy equivalents, but without recourse to these kind of coconut oils, which are the standard ways of doing it, but they do kind of come with these drawbacks as well. So they had to go through quite a lot of experimental, iterative work to find alternatives. And it wasn't just alternative ingredients as well, it was kind of alternative production processes that would kind of match the characteristics and stability of these kind of dairy-based products. So as I say, that one went to inquiry and it was successfully defended, I'm pleased to say. Another one was, another kind of niche one, was a jewellery repair company. So they had two different challenges associated with, firstly, synthetic gemstones. So they had a series of well-established repair processes that worked on naturally mined stones and also kind of hallmarked metals and alloys with UK kind of standards. But the challenge for them was that as advances are made in how synthetic gemstones are made, they might be chemically identical to mined versions, but structurally there can be small differences between the two. So they found that the processes that they'd been using on the natural variants didn't work on these synthetic gemstones, and they again had to go through iterative development until their processes could be made to work as effectively on the synthetic variants. And they also had some challenges associated with different kind of alloys. So as jewellery manufacturers were changing the alloys that they were using, for example, they were adding iridium instead of cobalt to platinum, then that was creating issues within their repair processes, and all of a sudden they weren't as effective, so they had to invest in R&D to change and adapt their processes to keep up with the changes in the jewellery world. So yeah, those are a couple of interesting examples.
Well, we know sort of operating as an accountant or a consultant in this market that you've got the complication of the HMRC guidance and some of the terminology you talked about before and technical advances and technical challenges. But equally, on the other side, we've got the challenge of understanding what is it that my client is working on and how can I get underneath those technical issues around that. So it's clearly, there's clearly a lot of complexity around this. So how well do you think HMRC are coping with those challenges, and how good a job are they doing at applying their standards, do you think?
I'd say, obviously, like any other form of kind of consultancy, different people will have slightly different ideas of how to apply the standards. But I'd say that within HMRC, there's kind of two levels. So there's the standard of claim that you've got to hit if you don't want an inquiry. And then there's the standards that you need to meet in an inquiry, and they're quite different. So if you are unlucky enough to kind of get selected for an inquiry, they will kind of look at it with a huge amount of, let's say, pedantry and detail, and they'll really kind of be sticklers for the tiny minutiae of what's in the guidance, and they'll be splitting hairs. And they've got some really good people actually that kind of deeply understand technology and also its application, the application of their guidance to technology. Having said that, the vast majority of claims are not subject to that amazingly high standard, and they're kind of washing through. So there's definitely a kind of gap between making your claims good enough not to get inquired into, and then getting your, if you are selected for inquiry, the standard is much, much higher. So yeah, I wouldn't say they're that consistent for that reason.
Great. If anyone does have any further questions on the guidelines, please feel free to drop them into the excuse me, the Q&A box, and we'll try and get onto those at the end of the webinar. So moving on, preparing robust claims. So we recently published an ebook on this topic, which was really popular with accountants and consultants. Mike, what are the things that we can do to ensure a robust claim?
Well, as you mentioned, we've recently published that ebook, and there is a section in there on exactly this topic. And that covers an 8-step process for putting together a robust claim. But out of those 8 steps, I think there's 3 of them that stand out for me as being the most important. So that the first one is establishing whether the organisation, the company themselves, are eligible for the scheme. So that's basic things like, are they a limited company? Are they trading as a going concern, and so on. So clearly, if they don't meet that criteria, don't spend your time working on a claim. But then I guess the next big thing is trying to figure out the eligibility of the projects that they're working on, and that covers, you know, those key points that Richard mentioned a few minutes ago. So it's understanding what the technical challenges are and what the technical advances are that they're meeting. Now, of course, one of the things that we're proud of is the fact that we've built a piece of software to help you do that. But clearly, you know, that's all about being familiar with the HMRC guidelines and just what it is that they're looking for. And then the third thing is making sure that around that you've identified a robust set of costs associated with meeting those technical challenges and those technological advances. So those second 2 things, technical challenges and costs, are the main elements of a report that needs to go in to support your claim with HMRC. And you know, that's the driver, if you like, of our tech, is to make sure that we're able to help you to go through a robust, repeatable process and at a manageable cost level, if you like.
Great, thank you. Again, if anyone's got any questions on our software or any of the things that Mike's just mentioned, you can drop those into the Q&A box. I've got a couple of questions in there already, so that's great. Keep those coming, guys. And finally, common mistakes and pitfalls. So Richard, I know this is a hot topic with a lot of people. Where do you see accountants and consultants going wrong?
So one area I can think of, just kind of sticking within my area of software, and this is not something that just accountants are doing wrong. I would say that this is kind of industry-wide. So also consultants and the companies themselves that are claiming for relief. It's just there's a lot of confusion about what you can claim for within software systems. And I think sometimes there's a confusion about companies that are paying for the development of a system. They think automatically they're advancing science or technology in computing science and they should be able to claim for R&D tax relief, and actually that's often not the case. So there's definitely a difference between paying for development work and subcontracting R&D or seeking to make an advance in computing science. So just to kind of give you a little example of what I mean by that is, imagine that you've got a client, say it's an estate agent client, for example, they're developing some kind of new IT system to help automate their business processes. They're paying a specialist subcontractor to do that. If that claim was going in, and this is based on kind of feedback I've seen from HMRC, HMRC would first of all say, okay, well, tell us what's the advance of this? Are you claiming an advance in estate agency or software development computing science? And of course they would say, okay, software development computing science. And then the HMRC would say, okay, so tell us about the people leading this project. Are they competent professionals in computing science, the area that you're claiming to make an advance in? And they'd say, well, actually, no, we're specialists in being estate agents. We're not specialists in databases or data architecture, or whatever. We're using a specialist contractor. And then HMRC would say something like, okay, so if you don't have competent professionals, how are you able to kind of know what the industry baseline is within database architecture, data processing, all that stuff? So that would be the first challenge, is on the basis of the people leading the project are not competent professionals, and therefore would find it hard to know and specify what that industry baseline is and what an advance relative to that baseline was as well. Now, let's say that that estate agent did have, you know, 1 or 2 people that had some kind of IT background, and they were saying, okay, well, we actually do have some competent professionals. Then the secondary challenge of HMRC would be, okay, well, you're building some system, but what's actually new about that system? Because you can think of any kind of software or IT system in, it's like a cake with 2 levels. So on the top level, you've got the functionality layer. On the lower level of the cake, you've got technology, the means by which that functionality is developed and implemented. But where loads of people go wrong, and business kind of leaders are, I think, particularly guilty of this, is when asked to talk about their projects and their new systems that they're developing, they'll talk about the functionality layer, like what the system does, who it supports, the outputs of it, and so on. And what they don't realize is that to HMRC, actually, what the system does on a functionality basis is almost completely irrelevant, because what HMRC are interested in is looking through that functionality level into the tech base underneath it and saying, okay, well, what's new about the tech? So they really kind of do drill down, or attempt to drill down into what's at that lower level and what's new about the technology, which means that, you know, if you've got clients that are coming to you and saying, hey, we want to build a new website, we want to implement a new CRM system, our advice to customers is always, well, just have a bit of a sanity check and talk to your client about, like, do you regard, like, what is new about a new CRM system? Because obviously these systems have been around for quite a while now, they're quite well established. So it is useful, I think, just to always have a bit of a sanity check with your clients, and don't feel that just because software is involved, is being developed, that necessarily R&D is involved. And of course, that's not always a popular message with clients, but it's always kind of good, I think, to be straight with them, so they hear it from you rather than HMRC down the line once they spent a lot of time looking at it.
Great, so that has taken us to the end of our discussions. Thanks for that, Richard and Mike. And now we've got a few minutes just to answer some of the questions. So we have actually had some questions submitted, so thank you for that. And you'll notice that there's been a couple of people who've actually upvoted on some of the questions. So I'm going to go to the top of the list. The most popular question has come from Siobhan. So thanks, Siobhan. So I'm going to read this out to you guys, and then between Mike and Richard, you can decide who wants to answer. So in terms of inquiries, we're not seeing any R&D inquiries, and some of the R&D work that we have seen completed by boutique firms hasn't been good. What is HMRC's approach to R&D inquiries? How many inquiries have you seen? And do they only look at claims above a certain limit?
Okay, so lots of questions in there and lots to talk about. So if I take that last question first, do they look at claims above a certain limit? Our observation over the years has been that if the claim is about £50,000 of tax benefit or up, it's probably going to attract at least a cursory check, not necessarily an inquiry, but they'll look at that more closely than they would if the tax benefit is less than 50k. With regard to HMRC's approach on inquiries, so just generally, I think what they'll do is they'll seek kind of an informal approach first. So they'll contact you or the client, say, look, can we just have a chat? We're not quite clear on where the R&D sits. If you're really responsive and helpful at that point, the chances are that their approach will be to keep it informal, which is great. However, if the client or the advisor isn't forthcoming with information, then they'll tend to make the process formal, and you'll start getting letters through with very kind of specific requests for information. What we have heard anecdotally is that they don't maintain blacklists of providers that they're concerned about, but in their words, they keep very dark grey lists. So what they mean by that is, if providers have been kind of found to have been submitting a number of claims that HMRC aren't happy with, they'll go into that list, and then HMRC will systematically work their way around all claims that have come from that provider. And one of our customers, unfortunately, was in that position where they had been using an external company to help them with R&D, and there were about 5 or 6 inquiries resulting from that work, which we subsequently helped them to clear up.
It's probably worth just mentioning in answer to Siobhan's question there, the inquiry rate. So we think that's somewhere between about 1.5% and 2%, and we have all submitted claims that actually end up going to inquiry. So probably the sample rate's somewhere around 5%. So on the face of it, that seems really low. But I guess it's back to the point that you raised earlier on about it's really important to make sure that you're staving off the potential for an inquiry in the first place. Yeah, that's a good point. Like, the risk of inquiry overall, I would say, is quite low, but the risk of not being able to defend claims at inquiry is reasonably high, just because of the standards that they apply. Yeah, so it's low risk, but it's high impact. If you're in that situation, it's a nasty place to be.
Great. We've also got a question here from Matthew. Are you allowed to name a competent professional from the specialist IT subcontractor company? So that's a good question. I see where you're coming from. So
let's go back to the example where we've got the estate agent producing a specification for a system that they want. They pass that system specification across to a professional software development company, and it's then up to that software development company to determine how to meet that specification. So the chances are 9 times out of 10, they'll look at that spec and say, well, that's easy, that's straightforward. We've done many similar things in the past. We can develop that spec using existing tools, techniques, and knowledge. But there might be something really unusual about that specification where they think, well, actually, we're going to have to kind of start our own side project to do some R&D of our own. So they're taking some technical risk to develop some new IP that they end up using to satisfy that contract. So that's a separate thing. So in that type of situation, what tends to take place is, because it's the specialist IT company that has the skills and experience, the competent professionals and so on, and they're taking the technical risk to do effectively a sideline project that's going to be useful for them in that contract and also others like it, the eligibility tends to reside within the specialist IT company. So of course you can nominate whoever you like, but as the conversation kind of develops with HMRC, what we've seen in the past is them saying, well, actually the eligibility doesn't lie with the people creating the spec, because they don't have the competent professionals, they're just saying what they want. And it's actually the people, the company with the skills and experience and knowledge who's taking the risk. That tends to be where the eligibility lies.
Great, thanks,
So
Richard.
the response, yes, but it might not help you.
Brilliant. So we've got quite a few questions here. Siobhan, your questions are popular today. We've got another question here. In terms of record keeping for R&D activities and costs, what does HMRC expect to see in an inquiry? What level of detail do they require?
So it's not so much the level of detail that they're looking for. I suppose it's a level of understanding from the client and a sign that they have kind of approached this from a genuine, honest way, and they've tried to do the best they can with the knowledge that they've got. Having said that, as they go through, past the inquiry, future claims, they would expect to see the client retaining things like time capture systems. So they're getting better at recording their costs. They've maybe got more detailed breakdown of subcontractors or raw materials, things like that. So I would say that they would definitely expect the client to be better set up after the initial inquiry, but they don't expect companies to get this perfect right from the start. They are quite understanding, I'd say, in understanding that companies might have an imperfect understanding at first, but they would expect to see that improve, especially if they've had the support of the inquiry.
Great. Richard, I'm going to give you a wee breather. There's a question for you, Mike. Are you seeing more firms adopt fixed fee pricing and moving away from contingent fees?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, our experience with our own customers, we're seeing a lot of them move towards a fixed fee model, and I guess the reason that they're able to do that is because by adopting our technology, they're effectively fixing their cost base. So they're working with a known cost of delivery, which then they can pass through as a fixed fee to their clients. But I guess as a sort of general direction of travel in the sector, again, we're seeing more and more of that as people realise that they can offer a cost-effective service, and that actually, if you adopt the right approach to delivering this service, you can do that efficiently and quickly and at a reasonable cost. So yeah, definitely, I'd say that's the general direction of travel in the market.
Great. And then another question for either of you. This one comes from Mark. Who is the final arbiter on validity of technical uncertainty within HMRC if a company disagrees with at HMRC challenge?
Okay, so HMRC will first of all be looking to the competent professionals within that company. If there's disagreement at that point about what constitutes an advance, then they could take that to tribunal, where there'll be a kind of more or less independent assessment about how the rules are being applied. That seems to be done really, really rarely. Certainly all of the inquiries that I've seen or been involved with, we have been able to kind of come to agreement with HMRC on what is or isn't R&D. So yeah, tribunals would be the answer to that. It's not something I've seen because it is so rare.
Is there any evidence of claims being delayed due to disruption in normal business?
I would say actually the reverse of that. I think that as a response to coronavirus, the policy from HMRC was actually to churn through as many claims as quickly as possible. So I think there was a point towards the beginning of the year where there was quite a backlog of work that had built up from them, but I think they've kind of really tried to push as much through. So I think obviously some claims will be held up just going through the usual kind of inquiry channels, but broadly I think they've accelerated the processing of claims.
We're getting feedback from our customers on that recently, that we're down to sort of three to 4 weeks in terms of handling time. So that's as you say, Rich, that's way quicker than it was 6 months or a year ago.
Yeah.
Okay. Tony, yes, you're right. The ebook is on the website. So if anyone's looking to get access to that, it's on the guide section of the website. Another question here from Matthew. As an advance also applies to appreciable improving an existing process or technology, is there an argument for appreciably improving software and computer science for software projects that you're carrying out?
So yes, absolutely. You can appreciably improve things that already exist. But again, it comes down to, I suppose, what are the kind of significant technical challenges involved in that, and do you have the competent professionals that are going to be useful in resolving whatever those challenges were? So yes, you can. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly a fine line between what constitutes an appreciable improvement and what doesn't. And again, that can come down to an interesting discussion between HMRC and the competent professionals within the company. What I would say is if the company doesn't have its own competent professionals, that conversation is going to be quite tricky.
Okay, just got a couple more questions here. If the IP stays with the company who has subcontracted the work out to a competent individual, sorry if I don't read this properly, would the company not be in a position to claim R&D? Do you want me to read that again?
No, it's okay, I got it. These are great questions, thank you. So it used to be a requirement of the scheme that you had to own the IP in order to make the claim. As of, I think, about 2012, that requirement was withdrawn. So I'd say that IP is an indicator of where R&D, the right to claim R&D sits. It's not, it doesn't give you the right. So you can have a commercial agreement. So we come back to this example of the estate agency. Say they have a commercial contract with a software development company that says, here's the system we want you to build, here's the spec, and by the way, we want to own all the IP of this. Well, that's fine. That's kind of vesting the IP with the people that are paying for it, as is probably pretty common. But in terms of the technical know-how that's kind of being created on the other side, that technical know-how, you know, if there was something exceptional about that specification that meant it couldn't be met using existing tools, techniques, and knowledge, then that know-how is kind of residing within the company that's created it, so the specialist technical software development house, not necessarily the company that's commissioning the work. So there's a difference, I suppose, between what the commercial agreement is and what's in the contract, and where the challenge is being met and how are those being resolved. And typically those will be resolved by the company that has the skills and experience to do so, not the one that's created the contract in the first place.
Great. Mike, this is perhaps a question for you to answer. So we've got someone here registered for the R&D course in August. Like to know whether this covers everything to start their R&D function within their firm. So if you don't mind, just
yeah, that would be a big ask, wouldn't it? So so the idea of the courses that we've got laid on is to raise awareness of the scheme and some of the details we've been talking about here. So to equip anyone who's on that course to have intelligent conversations with their clients about the scheme. So it's all about giving you confidence to be able to talk about the scheme out in the big wide world. And I suppose in combination with that, we've got the ebook that we've already mentioned. We push out a lot of content via social media and via our blogs as well, that are all about trying to equip people with more and more knowledge and awareness about doing exactly what your guest has asked for there, being able to start their own R&D function. And I suppose the sort of icing on the cake there is that's exactly what our software is there to do as well. It's there to give you that business process. As I said earlier on, is kind of robust and repeatable and meeting all of HMRC's requirements. So the answer to the question is the course is a key component in all of that, but it is only just one component. There's a lot of other things that we do to help you build that function within your firm.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. And just one final question, just to wrap up. What do you see in the future for the R&D consultants?
Sorry, Gillian.
I'll ask that question to Richard.
Sorry,
yeah.
Broke up there, but I'll take a guess at the question. So I think we will see the trends that we've currently got will continue. So I think more and more people will be kind of using tech to take work back in-house and reduce the reliance on the big specialists that are out there. It was also interesting, so last week, or within the last couple of weeks, I was on the RDCC, so HMRC's Research and Development Consultative Committee call, and they were talking about PCRT, so professional conduct in relation to taxation, and how that applies to R&D tax relief consultancy as well. And just the kind of general mood on that call between the attendees was that I think there was some kind of concern about the variance in standards that are being applied when people are helping clients make claims. And there was a perception that some people that are sticklers for the rules are being undercut by people that are maybe playing fast and loose with the rules. So what I think we might start to see is that voluntary standards start to emerge, kind of coalescing from conversations between advisors about, well, what constitutes an ethical way to deal with clients? How can we kind of have a code of conduct and practice that is a really kind of ethical way of doing business in this area? So yeah, that was, I thought, an interesting development, and we'll be keeping an eye on where that one goes. Brilliant.
So that's us reached about as much time as we've got today for questions. And there were a couple more questions that we didn't manage to answer, but as I said before, we will write up some of these answers and submit them onto our blog and then send those over to you by email. So hopefully you'll get everything you need from us in the next day. And that's us. So thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great to have you here. So many brilliant questions, and we hope to see you soon. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.